All right, here we go. We are going to start cruising through our themes now. Last week being the people theme, this week being nature. Typically, if we were in a normal classroom situation, I'd spend 2 weeks on each theme, but we're going to kind of consolidate our work, and I'm just going to pick out the highlights for you to work on. So hopefully that makes you feel a little bit better about the amount of work I'm giving you. Let's start talking a little bit about nature photography. And this can totally relate to all of the things that we've learned so far. I'd really like you to start by reading this article. Don't skip it. It's a good way to get your mindset on how all of the things that we've learned so far can apply to what we're doing in this theme. So there are 7 steps in this article, and a lot of them touch on things like the rule of thirds, the use of lines, and those are things that we've talked about in our foundations theme, but I want you to be thinking about how does that apply to me going outside and taking the best pictures I can possibly take. The author of this article is British, so you might notice some different English spellings and maybe some phrases that we don't necessarily use in our American English, but read that. It's a good, quick read, and I think it'll be helpful for you. Let me give you a couple of photographers that we can get inspiration from and learn from. So Chris Burkhardt is the first one that I wanted to talk to you about. You may know who he is. He's pretty popular. I think he's very inspiring. Here's his website, so you can go through and take a look at his work. It's super beautiful. He does a lot of work with other people collaboratively and going out into different areas in the world and photographing both still photographs, and as you can see, he does a lot of film work. So that is amazing and exciting. Here are some stills. Does some adventure photography. Gorgeous. Keep this photographed in mind. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that in a minute. I will let you dig around on that website on your own time, but I want you to know it's there. These Google Slides are going to be linked in Schoology for you so that you can go through this on your own. This film is something totally worth watching, Under an Arctic Sky. It is a documentary that tells the story of one of Burkhardt's expeditions where he took a team of surfers to Iceland, and they surfed and captured these beautiful images. So
Sitting
that
at the beach, all of a sudden, this idea kind of dawned on us, like, what if this is possible?
there you go. There's that shot I was talking about
We
earlier.
got lucky this could actually come to life.
Dude, this is it. This is it right here. If they get a wave.
But I don't think we had any idea what we were about to get ourselves into.
Oh my gosh.
All right. You can find that film, I know, on Amazon Prime now. It used to be on Netflix, but I checked right before I put this together for you, and I don't see it there anymore on Netflix. But Under an Arctic Sky, I know you guys have all kinds of ways to get things online, so give it a go. It's worth watching. I think you'll really like it. Here's another photographer, an artist, Andy Goldsworthy. Andy Goldsworthy is known for going outdoors and building these really beautiful sculptures using found materials. So you can see on the right, he has this leaf pattern that he's put together, and all of these red leaves are floating in water. And on the left, he's using, looks like pieces of bamboo or sticks, and he's putting them together into this big circular pattern that he then photographs. So there's kind of 2 sides to his work. There's the actual physical piece, which is temporary, and then there is the photograph, which is a secondary piece, which is more permanent. It captures that temporary piece. Now, since he's gained more notoriety, he has produced more permanent work. And if you click on this, you can see a portfolio of some of his works. And you'll notice that some of them look like they're not outside. They're more in a museum type environment. And that's because as he's become more popular, here's another example of that, people have hired him to make installations in spaces where people could come view them. But we're going to talk a little bit more about his work and his process in a little bit. Here's a photograph of one of his pieces, and you can see, I'm imagining in this scenario, he probably collected the different colors of leaves, and then he arranged them in this really beautiful gradation, and then photographed it. It's so simple, but so naturally beautiful and complex at the same time. He also has some work that he's done with ice in the cold, and these pieces are attached with water and just natural elements. So I think it's just fascinating to look at because it's both natural and man-made, which is interesting. This piece I put in here, I wouldn't say that this photograph is fine art, but I put this one in here because here's one of Andy Goldsworthy's pieces that is local to us. This is at Frederick Meyer Gardens in Grand Rapids. So if you've been there, you may have seen this archway, and that is an Andy Goldsworthy piece. He also has a documentary. It's called Rivers and Tides. If you're looking for it, I did see that it's also on Amazon Prime. It's an older documentary, but I think if you're into his work and you want to learn more about that, you could dig that up and check it out too. And this video I love because it shows his process. And I think seeing artists' steps in their work and seeing kind of what's at the core of their work, it gives you a better appreciation for who they are as a person and what their work is all about. So I am going to play this video. Just want you to sit back and watch it and enjoy it, and try hard to listen through their accents. Andy Goldsworthy is British, and I love a good British accent. But try to take a listen. It's not too hard. But I really want you to appreciate his work and listen for how important doing this, kind of going out and exploring and playing, how important it is to him, even now that he's made it big and he has works at museums around the world and people are commissioning to do other work that he's getting paid for. Listen for how important this part of his process is to him as an artist. All right, here you go.
The Scottish borders, man's country. Here's the proof, looming out of the gloom. A gorgeous tower of muscular Scottish stonework that any Inca would be proud of. This fine cone of stone was made by the brilliant British land artist Andy Goldsworthy, who lives up here in the borders. I'm supposed to be meeting up with him tomorrow to make a new piece somewhere out here. Oh, nice. Bit of frost on the ground.
Stayed remarkably long.
You must have extra thick skin on the bottom of your feet, Andy.
No. I love the cold. I can work anywhere, and there are great landscapes everywhere. You know, any landscape it can offer me something to work in. The people here have shown a great tolerance and at times interest in what I do. And you know, I don't work on my own fields. I only have a 6-acre field in front of my house. I depend on their goodwill to some extent, and their tolerance to allow me to work in these places.
It doesn't bother you that no one ever sees, or very few people ever see, this part of your work, the real part, the core.
You may think this is a fairly isolated, secluded spot. Probably more people visit here than artist studios. You know, and at any time, a group of hikers, walkers, farmers can walk by me. And unlike in a studio, they can ask you what you're doing and come down and, you know, and examine it. So the intention with work like this is that I really don't know what I'm going to do. It's about looking and learning and seeing and responding to the day, the materials, and trying to understand a little bit of that day, that material, that place, that moment.
Well, I'm here to help you. Let's
Well,
go.
Once I decide what I'm doing, you maybe actually you can bring those couple of branches there that I just picked up. What's interesting about, and in fact, what's interesting about this whole place, it's a place that I actually walked by for many, many years. It doesn't seem a lot, but when you get inside of it, many of the trees here are dead, and eventually they fall and collapse. So there's a huge, heavy sense of death and decay in this place. The amazing thing is that when it falls in, the elm trees fall into the water, they create these amazing waterfalls to be worked in. And because they're made not of rock but of branches, it means you can kind of stick things into it, which I could never do with a rocky waterfall. So that's the kind of things that I'm trying to think of getting something that could be almost suspended miraculously in front of this water. To be honest, I think the chances of this succeeding are pretty slight. So, you know, that said, if you can try and find any curved, smallish branches, just look around at the elm.
Pieces like this.
Yeah, pieces like a bit thicker maybe, whatever you can find.
No sooner said than done.
All right. It is driven fundamentally by intuition. This part of my work, you know, this is the food, this is the nourishment, this is what gives and feeds all the other things that I do in exhibitions, permanent works, outdoor installations, whatever. This is like the source. Oh, wow. I need both.
That's you, isn't it?
Marvellous. Terrific.
That's what particularly
Great,
goes.
just pop them down there.
Look at that.
Can you find any more?
Do you want some more?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, that all this decay that's created this place allowed me to make this. There's so much beauty come out of that process of change and decay. Every so often when you get a big flood, the whole landscape of the stream bed changes completely. And it's such a huge sense of loss when you come to a place like this that I've worked in before and it's been washed away. You know, it's no longer there. Rocks that have been moved, trees that have been blown down. It's really unsettling, really unnerving.
And then it all starts up again.
Then it all starts up again, yeah. Never the same as before. Always a different place, you know?
Good one, isn't it? I bet you're pleased with that, Andy.
Yeah, I am actually.
All right, I'm going to pause that right there. Every time I watch that video, I get something different out of it. And I think there's so many beautiful lessons in there. One thing I just heard that I never heard before was the interviewer asked, you know, how do you like working out here versus in an artist studio? And he said, well, there's more chances of people stumbling across me while I'm working out here than there are of them, you know, coming into a studio. And then if they're hiking by and I'm working, they can stop and ask what I'm doing and I can talk to them. So I had never really thought about him saying that before. But did you hear what he said about this kind of work where he goes out and, like he said, he's just kind of trying to be really in tune with the elements, what's going on around him, how the landscape is. He said, you know, sometimes that stream is different if there's been a lot of rain. But the thing that I love that he says in this video is he uses the word, the sauce. This is the food for all of the other work that he does. He knows as an artist that he has to go out and spend time playing and learning and trying to be in tune with the environment and just make things up intuitively and spontaneously. And if he doesn't do that, his other more professional, we'll say more professional work suffers. So the reason why I think that's important for us is I think as human beings, and this is bigger than photography and bigger than art, but I think as humans, we need to think about what is our sauce? What is the food that fills us up? Especially right now in this situation, if you're feeling kind of drained and bored, what is your sauce? What do you need to do to really fuel your passion and fuel your work? So, kind of philosophical, but I think that is something from that video that we can see is very important to him, and it's important to his work. So pretty cool. And of course, that levitating looking ball coming out of the stream, isn't that beautiful and super cool? All right, let's talk about our project. So we are going to use Andy Goldsworthy's work to create and photograph a sculpture of your own. So how can you create and photograph a sculpture inspired by his work? That is your question for the week. So there's 2 layers like we had talked about earlier. There's the creating layer where you're going out and you're actually building a piece of art. That's going to take you considering the placement. And when I say that, I mean, look at where you're going to build. What's around it? What could be your background? What elements do you have to work with there? If you're choosing an area with a lot of sticks, it's going to be different than if you're choosing an area with water and sand. Build something beautiful and complex, just like Andy Goldsworthy did. He took dead branches and he built something just complex and beautiful out of it. I think it will be really helpful for you if you try to embrace the process of creating and enjoy being outside. Be present. I would just give yourself a chance to just take a deep breath and play outside. I don't know how long it's been since you've done that, and maybe you do it all the time and so you're super used to it, but maybe it's been a long time. So I would really try to be mindful of your time outside, enjoy it, and don't rush it. The second layer of this project is after you've created it, you have to photograph it. So there's really 2 projects in one. There's the actual sculpture that you're making, and then there's the photograph that you're taking. Don't forget, every time you take a photograph, you need to have composition and lighting in mind, and all of the things that we've talked about and learned about so far are important here. So make your composition purposeful. Make sure you take some shots from different angles and try to play around with how can I compose this photograph of what I built so that it looks the best and it looks the most artful. And then also think about your lighting. So is it a sunny day? Is it a gloomy day? You're going to want good lighting. And so maybe you build something and it's a gloomy day and you're going to have to wait for better lighting conditions the next day or later in the day. That is really important. And just keeping in mind, like I said, that your photo is its own standalone piece of artwork. That's what's going to make your sculpture permanent. All right, let's look at a couple different pieces of student work that can give us some pros and cons for how to execute this project. Here was a sculpture that some students made the last time I gave this assignment. And while the sculpture it was actually cool. If you would have gone outside and looked at it, it was pretty big. It took a few people to work on this. And if you could go walk up to it, you would see that it was very 3-dimensional and it was pretty neat what they put together. However, their photograph needs a little bit of help. So what would I do better if I were to photograph this? Number one, the angle on this is not that interesting. The fact that this is very symmetrical and balanced doesn't give me a lot of interesting things to look at. Also, the placement of where they chose to build the sculpture is the same color as their sticks. So the background and the actual sculpture are the same. There's no contrast as far as the color goes. And so it just all kind of blends together and it doesn't highlight the sculpture. So that's what I mean when I say think about your placement, because if you just go build something and you're not considering the background, when you go to take the picture, it just flattens everything out when there's no contrast. So think about that. Think about the angle. Could they have gotten on the ground and shot up through their sculpture? Could they have climbed up on that bank and shot down into it? Could they have used the light shining through it to take some shots? Like I said, the sculpture looked cooler in person than it does in this photo. The photo just kind of flattened it and didn't make it look as interesting as it was. Here's another example. This is a sculpture, I would say, that's a little more simplistic, although there are some very subtle, beautiful elements. You can see in the center, there's that upside down, looks like a mushroom cap, and then there's this kind of furry seed on top of it. And then they collected some beautifully colored leaves, and they're not, while the shot is symmetrical, the leaves in the kind of radial design of the placement of the leaves isn't symmetrical because there's little ones down here and some gaps, and this is more full with the bigger leaves. But I think the way that they decided to put this small sculpture on a rotted trunk, so you kind of have this centerpiece with this, you know, kind of rotting background around it, the texture of the moss, the beautiful variation of colors, the focal point in the center is really nice, but all of this has a lot more contrast, the background to the colors, and I think this is more successful. Not necessarily that the sculpture took a long time, but I think it was a thoughtful placement of the found objects. But the photograph in the end, the composition and the lighting is a lot more successful. So hopefully between these two images, you can see which one is more successful and why. And that's what I'm looking for from you. I'd like you to do some kind of beautiful sculpture, but I also want you to be considering how can you beautifully capture it in a photograph. All right, if you have any questions about this, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I am always here and I am super willing to help you anytime. These images are going to go in your Flickr album just like your other ones. So at this point, when you get this finished, you'll have 3 albums on Flickr, and this will be your 3rd one. You can call it your nature theme. All right, you guys, have a great week. Enjoy this. Get outside.